Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here to bring you another series. This series is designed for those who lead in the community, whether you be a faith leader or whether you be a community leader. It's designed for you. And not just for you only, but I believe that there are truths that are going to be shared that are applicable to other dimensions whereby you find yourself in a position of leadership. So I'm going to talk about today the core values for faith and community leaders. In this part one, we're going to deal with leadership and influence. And so let's get right into it so we can kind of get some sort of idea as to what's important. What kind of values are necessary for you as a faith or community leader? Leadership and influence. What does leadership and influence have in common? Credibility. I'll say it again. What does leadership and influence have in common? Credibility. So let's define leadership. And I've drawn these definitions from several scholars, and you can see the scholars cited here. And also on the last slide, you'll find the references where you can go and look it up yourself if you like. Leadership can be defined in many ways, but researchers have defined leadership as a process whereby one individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. Leadership is defined as a process whereby one individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. A leader is a person who influences individuals and groups within an organization, helps them to establish goals, and guides them toward achievement of those goals, thereby allowing them to be effective. So you can see the role that the leader plays is not only in guiding, it's not only helping people to establish those goals, but to guide them toward those goals. So what? So that the individuals can be effective. So in other words, leadership is really not about the leader per se. It's about all the people that are involved in the leadership process, which is the leader and also the followers. And when it comes to leadership in this kind of context, the common goal that we're trying to achieve requires both the leader and the followers to be on the same page and, in essence, to be influenced by each other. Leadership is the ability to influence followers to engage in achieving organizational objectives using appropriate motivational techniques of influence based on power and formal or informal authority. So obviously a leader should have some methods by which they're able to motivate others, to motivate their followers, to help them achieve organizational objectives. Now that doesn't mean that you're going to be the kind of leader where you got a thumb and you're like a despot or some dictator, because that's not the kind of leadership that we're talking about today. And that's not the kind of leadership that's effective, that's a core value for those who lead in faith and community circles. We can also say that Different people have been noted to be leaders. But the kind of leader we're looking at today is the one that is able to incite others, that's able to raise the level of morality amongst the group, and to also achieve some sort of morale to where not only are we moving toward that goal, but together we feel good about the goal that we're trying to accomplish. You could probably say that Hitler or Mussolini or some other, person was a leader, but did they really inspire individuals to a level of morality? And so that's one of the key things about the kind of leader that we're talking about and the kind of leadership we're talking about. It's one that inspires others to move beyond where they are, to move toward a common goal and purpose so that we can achieve that together. Well, let's talk a little bit about influence. Influence is any action or behavior that leads to changes in attitudes or behavior of another person or group. It's any action or behavior that leads to changes in attitudes or behavior of another person or group. So if you have influence, then use your influence to what? Inspire change in others' attitudes or behavior. In fact, that's a key component of leadership, is that ability to do that. Not to coerce somebody, because that's not leadership. If you got to twist somebody's arm or threaten them or make them feel small or, inept, that's not really leadership. That is really, that's really along the lines of being a dictator, along the line of someone that really does not care about the people that they are leading, but they're more so concerned about their own agenda. And so as faith and community leaders, we need to be cognizant of our own MO, our own modus operandi. Why do I want to do what I'm doing? And why am I saying what I'm saying? Am I coercing people to line up with my vision? Or am I twisting someone's arm? Or am I making threats, towards them that if they don't do it my way, that that they'll get labeled as operating out of witchcraft, or that's something that you probably would hear more so in a faith circle. I've heard people say those kind of things, but it does not always have to happen in faith circles where people begin to place labels on people that do not line up with what they are recommending. And so leadership is about influencing people to move in that direction without employing those kind of threats. It's a way by which you not only, even leaders do not have to be liked, but at the same time, leaders should be respected. And as being the kind of leader for faith and community situations, you have to earn respect. You cannot command respect and demand respect to come from others. And so influence is the ability to be able to inspire people to kind of look up to you or to kind of regard your path. They may not always agree with it, but they respect you enough and trust you enough to follow in the direction that you might be pointing them towards. One of the things that's associated with transformational leadership is the idea of idealized influence. And we probably would talk about that on a different segment of our core values on leadership. But idealized influence is when the transformational leader behaves as a role model for the follower. So now you can ask yourself a question: who is a transformational leader? And you can, right now, there are people that are going through your mind who is not a transformational leader. But one thing to rest assured, that a transformational leader behaves as a role model. That's idealized influence that's displayed toward the follower. In this case, the leaders are admired. We've already said this. They're respected and they're trusted. And members identify with the leader and want to emulate them. So there are leaders that are out there today, and there are leaders that have passed on, as it were, or have finished their course, that those who follow their philosophy and those who follow their leadership may want to emulate them, may want to model after them. I know in basketball, and there are certain coaches that were able to inspire their teammates or their team to rise to the occasion. And many times, some of these pro basketball players have gotten into professional arenas and they credit the coach. And many of them have talked about modeling their coaching when they decide that they want to leave NBA basketball or whatever it might be, that they want to get into coaching. They remember who coached them and their style. So idealized influence is when the transformational leader behaves as a role model for the follower. Obviously, you can't see that in someone who's in a position of authority that is operating out of coercion or functioning more so as a dictator. Well, let's look at something here that probably you may not have heard of before, but there is an interdependent relationship between leadership and influence. And I'll go on to say that in some of the core values that I'm going to discuss during this series, we're going to talk about the interdependent relationship between those values that will be presented. In this case, we're talking about leadership and influence. Leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. We saw this definition earlier as we quoted, and we also noted the author Northouse. Leadership involves influence. It is concerned with how the leader affects the followers. And leadership is a sine qua non, influence rather, is a sine qua non of leadership. Without influence, leadership does not exist. Sine qua non simply means something absolutely indispensable or essential. So let me say that again. Without influence, leadership doesn't exist. So this brings a point that if I'm a leader, whatever venue I find myself, I'll have followers. Is it appropriate for a person to call themselves a leader and nobody's following them? Or the only horn that's being blown is being blown by the person who's blowing it? In other words, maybe they're a leader in their own mind. The idea is not to be too critical of individuals that do toot their own horn, but are we the kind of leader that inspires others to embrace our philosophy, to embrace our teaching, to embrace our way of life, to embrace our vision? Therefore, a leader must have someone that's following them really in order to be a true leader. They should be influencing someone. And if we find ourselves in these positions and we're lacking in the area of influence, then obviously those are areas that we can work on. None of us are perfect when it comes to being a leader, but we all can improve upon the skills that are associated with leadership. And one of those learned skills, it's not always inherent, but one of those learned skills is the ability to influence others to achieve a common goal. Well, there's some other things we can talk about as we unpack this definition that Northhouse brought out about leadership, and that is leadership can be envisioned as a process. Defining leadership as a process means that it's not a trait or characteristic that resides in the leader, but a transactional event that occurs between the leader and his or her followers. So it's not a trait or a characteristic that resides in the leader when we talk about it as a process, but it's a transactional event. For example, you find in transactional leadership this idea of reward for labor, or some sort of incentive that's given if the followers or if the constituents or if the employees, achieve a particular goal. It's a process. The process is that you're trying to reach a particular benchmark that brings success to the organization. And so incentives is a way of understanding the transactional relationship between leaders and followers, and also between employers and employees. And there's nothing wrong with that when you look at it for what the end is trying to accomplish. Can we inspire people? Maybe incentives is a way to do that. Maybe thinking about the best interests of others. As a leader, we should be always thinking about the best interests of others and not just about what's going to benefit me. What's going to benefit the followers? That kind of gets into the idea of what transformational leadership is about, but we're not going to talk too much about that today. Process implies that a leader affects and is affected by followers. Well, it's an exchange. Not only is the leader affecting the followers, but the followers affect the leaders. So they should benefit from one another. They should be able to draw from one another. I'm thinking in the Bible where one particular leader by the name of David, and the Bible tells us that he surrounded himself with champions, which means he saw that he was not skilled in everything to be a leader. In fact, he looked to other people around him that were better at certain areas. And that's the true sign of a leader, is to be able to recognize in other individuals that are around you that, hey, you're better at this than I am. And so, therefore, empowering them, enabling them to be able to live out their gifts, live out their talents, is it's the kind of leadership that organizations thrive by. It's the kind of leadership that churches thrive by. It's when the leaders really do care about the people that follow and are really looking to push them up. So process, as we said, implies that a leader affects and is affected by followers. It emphasizes that leadership is not linear. It's not a one-way event, but rather it's an interactive event. So leadership is interactive, and the interaction occurs between the followers and those who are deemed or ascribed to be leaders. Another point about the process aspect is that when leadership is defined in this manner, guess what? It becomes available to everyone. And it's not restricted to only the formally designated leader. So that's more of a servant leadership model. You see it displayed and exhibited in the life of Jesus that, in fact, he didn't do any baptizing himself, but his disciples did all the baptizing. Many times he sent them out in twos to do the same things that he did. He was not just someone that says, go do this, but he also gave them, a portion of his power. He also equipped them to be able to do the very same things that he did. So he was kind of the center. He was a centrifugal force to the way that they carried out those particular goals. He was a centrifugal force of that kind of leadership. He was not in a hierarchical where he was here and he looked down and he spoke down and was pedagogical in that sense, but he was right there with them. He was among them and therefore inspired leadership from the center. He was a leader that was in the midst and encouraged them to move out from where they were with him and be able to do the same things that he did. It was not a hierarchical model. He's there and I'm down here, but it was more of a cyclical model, or one in which that he not only affected his followers, but his followers affected them. It was an interactive way, interactive style of leadership that we see exhibited between Jesus and the disciples. When we think about leadership occurring in groups, it helps us to understand that that's just a place where it happens. Groups are the context which leadership takes place. Leadership involves influencing a group of individuals to have a common purpose. We've already alluded toward that in the ministry of Jesus, that his group was his 12, and sometimes he had 70 or more. But his goal was to influence them to be able to do the same things that he did. Not just to tell them to do this and do that, and he crack a whip and they go do it, and he tell them to jump and they ask how high. No, it was kind of a interdependent relationship that exists between the style of the Jesus leadership style that he had with his disciples. We can learn from his leadership style, whether we are in faith or whether we are a community leader. We can learn from that. So when we talk about leadership occurring in groups, this can be a small task group, a community group, or it can be a large group encompassing an entire organization. Leadership also is goal-oriented. Leadership includes attention to goals. This means that leadership has to do with directing a group of individuals towards some task or end. Here, the leaders direct their energies toward individuals who are trying to achieve something together. Isn't that unique? We are trying to achieve something together. Therefore, leadership occurs and has its effects in contexts where individuals are moving toward a goal. We're moving toward a goal. And authentic leadership, and the kind of leadership that can be trusted, the kind of leadership that's credible, the kind of leadership that inspires, is one that is inspiring individuals, modeling before them, to where we all together can move toward a common goal. So, we come to this part of this presentation, and that is leaders and followers involved together in the leadership process. Let this be known, leaders need followers, and followers need leaders. Now, I know some of you listening feel like that you can do it better yourself, but in the role of leadership, involvement between you and your followers. And although leaders and followers are closely linked, it is the leader who often initiates the relationship, creates the communication linkages, and carries the burden for maintaining the relationship. So let me say that again. Although leaders and followers are closely linked, it is the leader who often initiates the relationship. The leader does. Creates the communication linkages. The leader does. And carries the burden of maintaining the relationship. So, to whom much is given, much is required. So the leader is the one they're usually the one that is engaged in initiating, creating the communication, and carrying the burden of maintaining the relationship. Sometimes the question may be asked, well, where do we draw the line when it comes to maintaining a relationship? I'm communicating, but they're not communicating back. Where do I draw the line? Why do I have to always be the one to initiate the relationship? Well, maybe we'll talk about this as we delve further into this particular series. Now I want to talk about some biblical examples of leadership and influence. And I want to invite your attention to Joshua and Caleb and the 10 other spies. And here I'm reading from Numbers chapter 13 and chapter 14. And really it starts out, and I'm not going to read the entire 2 chapters here, but I'm going to point out the most important things that I think that are applicable to understanding Joshua and Caleb and their predicament. In chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "The Lord said to Moses, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each of their ancestral tribe you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them." Drop down to 17. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up there into the Negev and go into all the hill country and see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land they live in is good or bad, and whether the towns that they live in are unwalled or fortified, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be bold and bring some fruit of the land. Now is the season for the first ripes." So in 25, at the end of the 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Yet the people who live in the land are strong, and the towns are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the land of Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live by the sea along Jordan." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone with him said, "We're not able to go against this people, for they're stronger than we." So they brought the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied, saying, "The land we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw there are of great size." Then there we saw Nephilim and Anakites that come from Nephilim, and to ourselves we seem like grasshoppers, and so we to them. And so we find here that after having heard the word of the Lord, God had already told them, "I'm giving you this land." What's the most important thing here? God had instructed them, "I'm giving you this land." And so God told Moses to send out 12 leaders, one from each tribe. And these leaders, 10 of them came back and they assessed the land, but they had a commentary. And they said, they extended it by saying that, look, they devoured their inhabitants. They called them a bunch of cannibals. And then it went on to say that we are like grasshoppers. But Joshua and Caleb had a different report, and they said, let us go up at once. So here we find leadership and influence in play here. The leadership of 10 verses 2 and the influence of 10 verses 2. And so sometimes your insight may be ignored by the status quo. But do you have what it takes to stand by your own words? Sometimes we have to wait for a future time to be rewarded for a present insight. Right leadership is not always rewarded in the present. And when God judged this group of people and he told them that you and all that followed you, this 10, you guys are going to die in the wilderness. And so really the only 2 out of the 10 that were able to enter into the land of promise was Joshua and Caleb. And it was at a future time where Joshua assumed the mantle that Moses had passed on to him. And Joshua was able to lead them into the promised land, that very same land that they had already spied out. So in being a leader, we have to be able to stand for something. And at the same time, realize that your insight, just because you're a leader, it might be ignored by the status quo. It might be ignored by your colleagues or constituents. And sometimes it may take something, sometimes the reward of that may happen in the future. The promotion may happen in the future. But we have to stay true to who we are in the present. I want to bring up another example of biblical leadership, and I want to go to the book of Acts, chapter 11, verses 27 through 30. And here we'll find a prophecy from the prophet Agabus, and it says in verse 27, and at that time prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them named Agabus stood up and predicted by the Spirit that there would be a severe famine over all the world. And this took place during the reign of Claudius. The disciples determined that according to their ability, each would send relief to the believers living in Judea. This they did, sending it to the elders by Barnabas and by Saul. The question that I want to raise today, Agabus was a leader, but why did the church regard his words? The key to that followership, the key to his influence is wrapped up in verse 27. And it depends on whatever version you got. The King James Version says that he was in the company of prophets. That's the number one thing we see here that kind of balanced his leadership, is that he was not just giving a isolated prophecy where it was just him by himself, but there were other prophets along with him that could also weigh the words that he was sharing to validate the truths that were being shared, were it definitely, inevitably by the Spirit. So that's number one, that he was in the company of prophets. And number two, I think because of his associations and because of his track record and because he was a person of integrity, that he was regarded as being credible. Credible to the point that this group of, this aspect of the early church, this faction of the early church, prepared for this famine, which occurred 7 years later. So Agabus had to have a great deal of influence. That influence, I believe, comes from the fact that he was with the company of others who could really balance him out. As leaders, we're not an island. We need to have other people to run things by, to bounce things off, and to hold us in check and accountable for things that we may not see all the truth around. We don't have all the eyes. And sometimes the other eyes are already around us in the people that follow us. As we said in the very beginning, What does leadership and influence have in common? And that is credibility. Well, thank you for viewing in today on Talking Points. We've talked about leadership and influence, part one of our core values for faith and community leaders. Part two is going to be coming up next. And I trust that you've been blessed by what was being shared today. I trust that you will add to your own coffers as leaders. And you that are followers, I hope there's something that you can learn as well. May God bless you. And we will see you again next on Talking Points.